So breaking news today on independentcode.uk, one of the first articles on its front page says, Cuba reinserts goal of advancing towards communism into its constitution. What does that matter to us as Americans? Well, for us, that's a scary concept. However, all over the news, TV, radio, everywhere today, we hear terms like capitalism, socialism, communism. These are words that are constantly around us, but Adam, do you really think people know what these terms mean?
Welcome everybody to another installment of History's Benchwarmers. You're hosted again by me, Adam.
And Rich.
And we got a really interesting podcast for you today. So, we all hear these terms of capitalism, socialism, communism. We want to figure out what it's all trying to mean. But we should look first at where it all originated, these ideas and concepts. There was a guy named Karl Marx in about the late 19th century. He was the son of a factory owner and had complications in trying to understand the difference between the bourgeois, which were the wealthy landowners and just the wealthy, and the proletariat, which were the workers, either on farms or in factories, which during that time it was easier for Karl Marx thought of this concept of capitalism. That's what it is. It's all about private ownership of land or the means of production. So within the means of production, there's two parts to it. There is the worker, the person who actually does it, and then the materials it takes to make a certain product, either that be cars or radios or steel, anything like that. But what Karl Marx saw was something that needed to be changed. He talked about a classless, moneyless, stateless society, which to us today sounds very weird, scary, kind of bad almost, gives that little vibe to it.
Well, the common means of production today, our economic system itself is so based on money. We are a capitalist society. Without money, what's the sense of working? What would our incentive be? So how would this be? So that's scary to us, looking at a whole different economic and political society, because it's not something that we can comprehend or understand, because we've been out of that type of lifestyle for so long. We're an industrialized society who's used to working and making money.
Well, see, that's the perfect thing about it, because what Marx talks about is that capitalism is actually the forerunner of socialism. So after a certain point, all these capitalist countries will become socialist, like as we see today in Canada and Sweden. They're democratic socialism, but democratic socialism, which is actually pretty nice when you think about it. And what socialism basically means is a collective ownership and democratic control of the means of production by the workers. So instead of private ownership over the means of production, you actually have the state control the means of production. And a democratic state, first of all, which is run by the majority. That's the point of a democracy. And everybody works together for the common good. So you're not working to fill the money, to fill the pockets of the wealthy, of the owners of the means of production, the bourgeoisie. What you're doing is you're putting it into the state, and then the state is going to give you what you need. Everybody's working towards that goal instead of working for the benefit of the 1%. So that's why it was scary, because a lot of these, this was after when Marx was writing this, it was during the Industrial Revolution. So this is when people are moving from being farmers to now becoming factory workers, and all being manipulated by the factory owners to do what they want and to make them money and to treat them like shit.
Well, this scare actually was very real in the 1920s, post-World War I. In Britain, there was constant strikes because a lot of the workers were wanting to gear towards capitalism, because, hey, they're working their tails off. They're getting paid very little. They're having to pay their company owners rent because they own the properties. So these owners become rich, they become powerful, but the people themselves, they struggle. So this became a big issue for countries throughout the world because they didn't want their society to get overthrown the same way that happened to the Bolsheviks in Russia. So,
With the Bolsheviks in Russia.
with the Bolsheviks in Russia, yes.
So I do agree with that, and that was one huge thing. But that's Leninism, and that I want to talk about after Marxism. But with the idea of socialism is everyone, contributes to the democratic state. But then at a certain point, all these countries become communist. After the socialist phase, they become communists. And then there is no state. And everybody's working to feed themselves. Like everyone's working not to feed themselves, but everybody is there to sustain themselves. They work for what they need and that's it. There's really no, if you really think of it, there's no real space for want there. Because it's like I have the necessity to keep on living. That's what I'm working for. That was the point of it. And then it's going to be moneyless, so everyone's working for what they need. Stateless, they don't have a democratic state anymore because it's just happening on its own. And then there's the classless. So we talked a little bit about the Bolsheviks and the bourgeoisie, but the bourgeoisie basically means like upper middle class or upper class, which was the small minority during that time. And then there's
It's the ruling class.
The ruling class, right. And that was a huge thing that they both knew, that the state, well, that's more of Lenin's view, but that the state, in Lenin's view, the state kept the minority in power. That was the point of the state. The state worked for the minority, not the minority worked for the state. The minority was funding the state, and the state would help them stay in power if they kept getting what they needed. It's just a puppet almost. That's the point of it, which is scary to think about.
So then, let me ask you this question. In an economic perspective, how strong of a country do you really think that would be? Because there is zero incentive for creativity. There's zero incentive for technology, unless it's a betterment of society's work ability. But truly, do you believe that in a communist society, we would have our cell phones, we would have these big businesses that are thriving, we would even have supermarkets the way we do today? I don't even think that would exist.
No, but a lot of people would argue that the kind of things that we have today, like the things that you listed, like a big grocery store and cell phones and things like that, people would argue that yes, is maybe continuing on with our technology, but is it really good for us? I mean, now we have phones, but we're always on them. We're not even looking around anymore. Everyone's always attached to their computers or their phones. Big old grocery stores filled with food that has to be made in mass productions that's not even real animals at this point, that they're just having to fill these grocery stores with that kind of food so that we can buy it, so that we can eat, so we can get the substitute type of nutrition from these things. And they say it's healthy for us, but really it's not. We're filling our bodies with garbage, basically. You see a pizza for $1.99 at the dollar store. I mean, come on. You know what I mean? Like, if it was like this kind of classless, moneyless, stateless society that Marx entails, then you would just have what you need. And I do agree that it doesn't really open up a lot of space for creativity. But you are living. It is basic human instinct. It's basic animal instinct to survive. And that's the point of it, is to just survive. You don't have this ruling class that you have to work for them and they give you so little because they can do that because they own the means of production. No, if everybody's the same and everybody's equal, we're all just humans. That's why this communist view, when it goes to Leninism, Stalinism, Maoism, all these other isms of communism, they were revolutionaries, these people. And Lenin too, Leninism. That they were all revolutionaries. And they wanted to see this happen through revolution. And they thought the only way to do it was to overthrow the overseeing state and to establish a new one. What Marx is saying is that it's going to dissolve on its own. If everybody just has what they need, we're not going to have what we have now. Everybody's going to be the same. because we're all just trying to survive. No, I'm from here, or I do this, or I do that. We are all the same. We are all just humans, and we have to survive. And we just take what we need, not what we want.
Can you see why that would be scary to our society today?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Can you actually fathom that style of life, though? Without thinking of, like, some outside crazy different world that has a society that's so advanced because they were social like that? I just, for me, that concept is scary because I like being able to be creative. I like being able to create things. I like being able to learn about different things. Now, you make it sound like having a phone at your hand at all times is a bad thing. It can be a good thing, too.
But
because we have so much information at our fingertips
right.
that allows us to know so much more than people before knew.
I mean, what this idea really does is it kind of shuts down what makes society. It's not like this anymore. Because if you really want to trace our evolution, we did come from a more primitive version of man. And even when we first started, I mean, we just evolved into what we did. But before we established language and a society and towns and, groups and stuff like that, what were we doing? Just surviving. That's the point of it all. But then we decided to evolve into something different, to spread out and to go to these different places on this planet.
But why did we do that? And why would we stop living in that hunter-gatherer mode, in that nomadic mode? Because when you're living like that, you're in a constant state of fear.
Mm-hmm.
You're not living to say, hey, my life is happy. You're living like, hey, I don't want to get killed by that tiger over there. Or, wow, that's a snake. I'm going to run because I'm not trying to die. So then, there's no quality of life. So with this society, we can all have sustained houses. We can all have the same food. We can all have the same everything. But then I refer to the book 1984, if you've ever read it.
I haven't read it, but told me about it and I still have to read it.
And that was a society where it's like everybody did the same exact thing. Everybody watched the same TV. Everybody read the same books. Everybody did everything the same. They would all go. And the world was gray. The world was not meant to be gray. Now, I understand why people like this idea of, hey, free education, free welfare, free this, free that, free this, or, communal for everything. But at the same time, the quality of life might not be the same.
No.
And that's why we as Americans fight that. Even though we have, our system is kind of corrupt and it's screwed in some aspects, but we still have that ability. Like, hey, if you want better medical care, you pay more to go to a better hospital. You pay more to have better insurance.
Right. But if
we're in a socialist society, I refer to a case in England where a child got really sick and he died in the waiting room because there's no priority when it comes to that. Everybody is the same. Everybody's on the same page. That's it.
But then if that little boy died, then somebody else got to live. You know what I mean? It's give and take when you look at it that way.
But then at that point, who are you to decide that? Oh yeah, well he died so someone else could live. How do you know that? What if that other person died at the table?
That person could have died, yeah. No, I understand that argument completely. But, so the people, let's say, that do have money, then they have priority over everyone else. How do we figure that out? Because regardless, if no one has priority, and we go to kind of what we have today, and now there are certain people who are priority over you because they have more money, that to me is just as bad.
No, you're right, and I'm not saying that our system is perfect. That's why I started this whole rant with saying our system is screwed in some aspect.
Yeah.
So, but I think we're getting a little off topic. So going back to Marxism, we left off on what?
So we left off on socialism to communism, I believe, and that shift right there into becoming a classless, stateless, moneyless society. That's the true version of communism. But the real fact of the matter is that there is no such thing as true communism as its true form ever been established in the world. It's a theory, really.
So do you think that theory Well, to explain the theory is what?
That's why there's so many different isms when it comes to communism. There's Marxism, which is the foundation. Then there's Leninism. There was Trotskyism. There was Stalinism. There's Maoism in China. There's a type of Leninism that was in Cuba. I want to study more on Che Guevara and how his Leninistic views led to his communist overthrow and the communist revolution movement in Latin America. Which, that just goes to show you that this true idea, that's what makes it a theory, is that this true idea may not be able to come to fruition because it all really comes down to people who take the dictatorship, because there is supposed to be a dictatorship.
Okay, so let me stop you there. Sorry, I'm not trying to cut you off. For that theory, do you think it would be more applicable for, say, a hunter-gatherer tribe, or for like a small tribal community, or just a small community of people in general, having a communistic view where it's, all for one, one for all type of mentality where, hey, you're over there farming and I'm herding and raising animals, and that person over there is the butcher, and that person over there is doing whatever as betterment for society, so we all have this communal factor.
Yeah.
And I think that would work fantastic with a small society. And that's where
communal.
Yeah, and that's where communism would be fantastic. However, in a country where we have how many people in this country? 2 million people or 2 billion people? We have a lot of people living here. That wouldn't work because there's only so many farmers. There's only so many butchers. There's only so many whatever's in this world, and if we're all doing the same thing, it wouldn't make sense, and that's why it fails.
Well, this is where the revolution part comes in. That's the big thing about these guys. The revolution part that comes in is that you understand how structured it is. That's why it's so hard for us to not agree with it. It's because structurally what we have is a capitalist society and a capitalist economy.
Yeah.
So to really have communism in all these other dictators' view is that you have to shut down and start over with the society. Like, not start over with the society, but you have to tear down those establishments and institutions. Yeah. And that's the hard part, because that's real revolution right there. That changes everything. Because that is a movement that people actually have to get in, and we have to destroy an institution that's been so established in us that we even learn about it subliminally when we're in school, when we talk about civics, when we talk about government. That they really want to solidify that this is it. This is what works. We're learning it because our country does this. And guess what? Our country works. So that means it works. And anything else doesn't. So.
And that's why this is such a scary concept.
Right. Because we don't
know.
Because we can't do it.
We can't
because we're scared. As much as people are like, we want to be revolutionaries, there is a point. Even for the radicals, there is a point that they don't go that far. Like, they'll do hell raising, they'll destroy the factories and make sure that.
So, but then do you think what then turns? So when you take down a government, what happens? There's a power vacuum.
There is a power vacuum.
There's a power vacuum that needs to be filled, and we as a society cannot lead ourselves. We are sheep. We need to be led. We need someone in power to, even if it's a scapegoat, we need someone to say, hey, well, he's the reason we're all screwed. Or he's the reason we were all perfect and we had the best life ever. We need that specific person because that's how we are as people. Whereas if it was a small tribe, you would have like a tribe of like elders making decisions. But you still have that hierarchy.
Right.
Where
that's human nature.
That's exactly. Which is
why
the
scary part.
The communal idea would not work. So once you overthrow a government, like let's use Cuba as an example. Che Guevara, you had Fidel Castro and his brother. They went in, they overthrew Bautista, they overthrew the American influence there. They overthrew that. That was so scary for us as a country that we completely blackballed them from the world.
Oh yeah.
We cut off trade, we cut off finance, we cut off everything.
And why do you think it was so bad? Because we did that to them.
So, but then in that power vacuum, look at what Fidel Castro did. He then took that position, and like I said in one of the other podcasts with Mike, what follows communism or any of those isms is dictatorship because that power vacuum is in place.
Right. But here's the thing that Marx says about dictatorships. There is a dictatorship within this movement. It's called the proletariat dictatorship. But the reason why it's a problem...
Can you explain proletariat for the audience?
So like I mentioned earlier, proletariat is the worker. So they're the people who are farming or are in the factories, or you working at McDonald's and you working at Burger King. You are the working class. That's what it means. We are in a class society, and that's the working class. People who have to work for a living, not people who have investments and people who have money.
So like for us, it'd be like a blue collar worker.
Could you just think about that? Because there's blue collar and white collar, right? There's people who work with their hands, like actually do things, and then there's people who don't.
Yeah.
That's proletariat and bourgeois. It's the same thing, man. Yep. It's the same exact thing.
But put into
capitalist terms. That's what I mean, bro. When he says from capitalism to socialism, that's what it's going to. You know, you see that. He was talking about this stuff when it was bourgeois and proletariat. It's white collar and blue collar. It's the same thing here, man. It's just that we colorized it to make sense. Like, this is our word and it makes sense to us, and it's easier and it's good compared to this.
Yeah.
It's not. So there is a dictatorship. It's called the proletariat dictatorship, or the dictatorship of the proletariat. What that is there is one person who's going to be in charge. But the reason why none of these communist countries really flourished and worked is because these men did not give up their power. There is a certain point that you give up your power when you become a democratic, state-controlled means of production, when the state has it. But then after that, once everybody gets the distribution of it, then the dictatorship falls. But the problem is that these men all had their own agendas. And they wanted to stay in power because they got all the means of production. You are literally the richest man in the country because you are the only man who can own anything in the country. That's why it was so hard for all of these men, Stalin, Fidel, Ho Chi Minh, Mao, the Kim Jong-un, and all of his, fathers and, going down the line.
The Kim Jong dynasty.
Yes. But you see what that is? They don't want to give up that power because the point is to redistribute land and to make sure that everybody is working and that everyone can work to sustain themselves. Like, that's the point. And once you get to that point, then you can get rid of the dictator.
So do you think that then there's going to be constant instability in a region that is communist?
If you have the right person in charge.
But then what happens when that person dies?
Right.
Because we can say, wow, we had the best, the best leader who instituted all these fantastic things. But then he died. Who took power? Is it going to be a dynasty of another family, and then you're going to have terrible, terrible leaders follow that one good leader?
Mm. Which
is a repeat of history then at that point.
Mind you, this is all socialism. Like, this is the first step. Is that first step once you...
So then let me refer to Nicaragua too. Looking at the Somoza dynasty, the first Somoza was good. There's a quote from FDR. It's already been proven it's not real, but he's talking about Somoza. He said, "He's a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch."
So it's not real.
It's not a real
But he
quote,
probably felt that
But
way.
the relations between U.S. Somoza, the U.S. put Somoza in power. Somoza studied here in the U.S. in one of the military schools in Texas, and his son studied at West Point.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so they were American trained, and the United States liked them because obviously they had their influences and they were able to continue to do whatever they had. But the first Somoza, Anastasio Somoza, the very first guy, he controlled everything from the wood production to food production to coffee to everything. Everything was his company's. But a lot of the people liked him because they had food, they had housing, they had a good system. The Nicaraguan currency was similar to U.S. currency. It didn't vary. Nicaragua was at a good time in their country's history. However, he dies. In comes his son. His son did an okay job. In comes a third son who did a terrible job. And he's the one that we hear about the Nicaraguan Revolution, like the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Is overthrowing him.
Was that a communist revolution?
Yes, it was a communist revolution. And now, the guy who fought him, Daniel Ortega, the guy who fought against whatever Somoza was, became Somoza. And he's continuing that path that Nicaraguans are like, hey, you know what? We need to fight back now because he's oppressive. He's killing us. He's taking away our whatever we have. If I have a kid, I can't send him to school because I don't have money to even feed him. So they're fighting that. And that's the issue with communism. And I think that's why we are so scared as a country that invades or social ideas invade our country, because we don't want that to happen as a society.
Right, but you see how it got to that point?
Because of the power vacuum.
Right. But the point is, that's what Marx is saying. He knows about that power vacuum that's going to be there. That's why there is a dictatorship. But the problem are these men who have humanistic, just human tendencies. That is their tendency. Like I said, man, they own the means of production. They are the means of production. Like these men, it's not private ownership anymore. It's you. Everything that's created in that country goes to you, and you facilitate throughout, either that country or you try to trade. But no one wants to trade with a communist country,
But that's what I was saying, though. That's why there's going to be constant instability because, hey, once a proletariat sees, hey, that guy's making a lot of money. I'm over here busting my butt, and I only have one loaf of bread and a couple pieces of cheese and some ham for the whole week, and he's eating lavishly?
Right.
What the heck's going on here? And then there's going to be constant instability in the region, no matter what.
But the point of it is that when you can do that, when you get the means of production, and you distribute it among everybody, then you step down. That's the point I'm trying to tell you, is that these men get this, and they don't step down.
No,
they are just enticed by power and greed and the government. That's what happens. They see what they can get, and they're like, I'm not letting go of this.
They're
and then
ambitious.
There are people who are saying, okay, you need to step down. And guess what happens to those people?
They get killed.
Yeah, they get killed or they get sent away.
So, but that's human ambition.
Right.
You're either a sheep and a follower who just goes with the flow, or you're somebody who's ambitious and steps out and say, you know what? No, I want to change something. I want control. I want power. I want money. I want this. I want that. And that's where.
But where does it stop?
Where maybe communism itself or socialist ideas are fantastic in theory, but are they actually applicable to society?
Right, and I was just thinking about that because it's humans that make communism, true communism, impossible to happen. We are what's stopping that from happening.
Yes, because of human nature.
Yes. Which, yeah, it's scary to think about when you really break it down, but at the same time, the question of the day is, can you really escape human nature?
No. You can't. Unless you become brainwashed. And you allow yourself to succumb to whatever is popular. Which is what's happening in our society today. Which is why people are just turning blind eye to a lot of things. Because they're so distracted on their phone. Because they're so distracted with their TV shows. Because they're distracted by other people's creative process that theirs dies. So, I guess I'm thinking, you mentioned this idea of Leninism. You already talked about Marxism. You talked some about communism. Now you keep mentioning Leninism, and I guess my thought too is Stalinism. What are the differences between those two, and are they similar in any way?
Well, they are definitely different. That's why there's so many different isms. Basically, what Leninism is he saw capitalism not as a forerunner for socialism, but for imperialism. So what Lenin thought was that after capitalism, after you can produce only so much in your own from where you are, you start spreading out, and you start colonizing, and you start, having imperial authority over all these different countries who are less developed than you are. And the point is you can manipulate them to get the resources you need to continue to drive that machine that is the means of production. So what Lenin wanted to do was to get rid of imperialism, you had to get rid of capitalism. That was his idea. So if there's no capitalism, that means imperialism can't happen. So we have to stop it at the source. So he was a revolutionary. He was one of those people who was ready for the revolution to happen. But he also had a different theory than Marx. His idea was that it was supposed to be led by a vanguard party. Basically, the Bolsheviks that we have in Russia. That it was a group of intellectuals who were class conscious of what's going on. And so that they can lead that 99%, the proletariat, into the right direction. They would take in charge. And then once they're in charge, that whole communist idea of spreading it out and distributing land and property and all of that out, then they would step down. And it's supposed to happen all over the world, this revolution. That's why Lenin, it was supposed to happen everywhere. And the first place to happen was imperialist controlled countries. Like Ghana, like anywhere in Africa, like in India, and all these other places that are being kind of taken over by these colonial powers that have been forever. All of Africa was carved up in the...
Well, and that's probably why you also see it rise in the Caribbean, Central, South America.
Right. So his idea was you have to overthrow your imperial oppressors, or suppressors. So he wasn't going to lead every single one of these revolutions. These people were to start from inside their own countries, from where they were, and start the revolution there. And then in the imperialist countries themselves, the revolution would start as well, because the proletariat is still the 99%. It's still the majority who are working in factories even harder now that these countries are bringing in more materials and wars are going on. So all that, and they're being sent to the front lines and dying, mind you, in droves. World War I was absolutely atrocious. It was awful, and the amount of people who just died without really putting up a fight because of trench warfare. But now you have these people who have these ideas of, why are we doing this? Why are we listening to these people who are just sending us here to die? Like, they're not here. They don't care. Yeah. We should really care. That's why when in 1917, when the revolution started, Germans and French and British on the front lines, mostly Germans, were coming in to the front lines. These younger 21, 20, 18, 19-year-old kids are coming into the front lines, and they're like, why are we here? Why? We're out here sitting and dying.
You really fucked up the date. You said 1917.
When did it end?
It ended in 1918. It started in 1914.
No, I'm saying these new people who are, these new fresh troops that are coming in, because people are just, they're dying like crazy.
Alright, sorry. Okay, so maybe explain that.
So, during that time in trench warfare, it was a new type of war. We didn't know really what to do with it, because we went from line formations to now...
Well, this is still technically line formation, just with modern technology.
Right. But
modern then.
Basically what would happen is there'd be a line full of, just down the trench, of guys getting ready to run the ramp in a no man's land to the other trench. They blow the whistle, and everybody would get shattered. They just get massacred by all the machine guns and rifles, because they're running in an open field, and the mortars and mines that are out there.
Yeah, called no man's land.
Yeah, and then the commander would look over, see everyone died. He's like, all right, round 2, everybody get up. And he would blow the whistle, and they would go out, and they would die. Because all that, the reason why World War I was so bad in terms of death was because that's what was going on in the first couple of years of the war. And it lasted for 4 years. For 2 out of those 4 years, they were just sending men to go out there and die. Millions of people. In a single battle, the French lost almost like 300,000 men.
Yeah.
It's insane. So now you have these people who have these socialistic ideas, right? And this idea of revolution, now at the front lines, that's not where you need them, because you need to win this war. And now you have these younger generation of people, that's where it all starts, in the younger generation, that really don't like what's going on. And they want change. And they don't want to be controlled by the minority anymore. So then that's what all would happen. And it would happen throughout the whole world, that it would happen like that.
Yeah.
Kind of like a domino effect. But it would. But then we would get to that dictatorship of the proletariat. And then once we get and distribute all that amongst everybody, that's the thing. We're not going to sanction you because you're communist. We're not going to not trade with you because you're communist. We are all here together. We are all Soviets.
So then at that point, you just drop the term communist, and and that's why they say comrade. Because we're all comrades.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know it still sounds weird, but he was very advocate for a revolution. But he said, do not, on his deathbed, do not let Stalin take power. I'm paraphrasing, of course. But he said, don't let Stalin take power because he is a madman. Don't do it. Those were his dying words in a letter. And Stalin came into power. Trotsky was supposed to actually be before Stalin. But Trotsky was exiled and then later found killed in South America, I believe, by what could be determined as an assassination by Stalin. Mm-hmm. But Stalin didn't want to keep, spreading that revolution. He was like, the revolution is going to be within our country, within here. So that's why I wouldn't say it didn't necessarily work. I'd have to do more research to find out if it really was that bad.
So when you say here, you mean within Russia or the Soviet Union?
Within the Soviet Union, which, mind you, like I said, there's no real true communism that's ever been done. If you look at what Russia was called during then, it was a union of the Soviet Socialist Republics. USSR. So they weren't even true communists in their own effect. So that's kind of what Stalin wanted, more just to keep it within Russia and keep it within the Soviet bloc and not spread that out. But if you don't do that, then all you can trade is with communist countries. But no one wants to trade with a communist country because they're communists, because they know that they want to spark this revolution.
So tying this all back into Cuba, like I read today on that article, tying all this back into Cuba, we see poor people really... It's poor people who want that socialist idea because they want to be evenly distributed power, evenly distributed with land, food, and just be equal amongst each other instead of all poor or all rich or whatever the case is. They just want equal power amongst everybody, and they want their lives to be better.
Right.
So I suppose that's why they want that. And you see that more with poorer countries, third world countries who are not as developed. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that these concepts scare us because, one, we can't fathom them. Two, it's something completely different to our way of life and our standard of living. And it terrifies our government because they're in power. They're the ambitious men who don't want to give up that power. Okay. So, with that, we want to thank everybody for joining us.
And we'll see you on the flip-flop. Peace!